Today's daf we're going to be learning is Chullin Daf Tefav. Today's daf is dedicated in honor of Yom Yerushalayim, celebrating the miracle of the liberation and reunification of our capital 59 years ago. Today's daf is sponsored by Mark Baker in honor of Shoshana Bluma, Shabbat Shalom, with much love. And today's daf is sponsored by Ezra and Rebecca Darshan in loving memory of Helene Isaacs, Chana Bat Avram David, on her 26th yahrzeit. She would have been so proud to see so many women learning on a high level. Okay, we're going to get started with our daf. We had a Mishnah at the beginning of Daf Yud Dalet. It's very important to remember because the basis of our shiur for the whole first part is going to be on the basis of this. Hashochet b'Shabbat u'b'Yom Kippurim. If someone slaughters on Shabbat or Yom Kippur, af al pi shemitchayev b'nafsho, even though they've done something very severe that is liable for karet, shchitato kshera. Their shchita is accepted anyway. In other words, we don't make the meat not kosher just because a malacha was done with it on Shabbat, or right, just because something was done wrong. They shouldn't have done it on the day they did it, but the act of shchita is accepted. Came Rav Huna and said, the Chia bar Rav said in the name of Rav, his father, it's the important part, Asura b'achila liyoma. But you can't eat it on Shabbat. Vinas ben Chevra Lamemar, second thing about this is the Chevra who heard this, the rabbis, the group of rabbis said, well, Rav's position that he doesn't allow it is based on Rabbi Yehuda. Okay? Now, the Gemara goes through a long process to figure out which opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. We had 4 attempts yesterday. None of them were successful. And in fact, I'm pretty sure that in the chat yesterday, it was mentioned, this answer, which we're going to get to. And you kind of wonder why the Gemara didn't start with it because it was pretty obvious this was the answer. So now we're going to get to the answer. We're on the second line of today's daf, third line. Ela Amar Rav Ashi. Okay, fifth answer. Rabbi Yehuda dimevashali. It's Rabbi Yehuda's position in the famous machloket between Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yochanan HaSandlar about what is the status of food cooked on Shabbat. Right, makes perfect sense that this would be the same machloket. Okay, ditnan hamivashel b'Shabbat b'shogeg yochal b'mezid lo yochal. Okay, I'm going to pull up the study guide right now, and you can follow along in the study guide to see the different opinions. Okay, so here we have someone who cooks on Shabbat. We're going to have a number of distinctions here. Number one, we're going to distinguish between shogeg and mezid. Was it a mistake, an accident that they cooked on Shabbat, or did they cook intentionally, right? You could see an accident. Maybe they didn't realize that what they did was actually considered cooking. Okay, mezid is on purpose. Okay, and then we're going to distinguish between when can you eat or not eat the food, on Shabbat, after Shabbat. And we're going to have a third distinction. Is there a distinction between the person who did it themselves and anybody else, or do we make no distinction? So let's see. The first opinion is Divrei Rabbi Meir that we just read. B'shogeg yochal b'mezid lo yochal. Now there's some words missing here that you need to fill in. If you did it unwittingly, you can eat it, even on Shabbat. That's what I added in black here. Even on Shabbat, you can eat it. B'mezid lo yochal, but if you did it intentionally, you can't eat it, meaning not that you can't eat it ever. You can't eat it b'Shabbat, aval yochal l'motzei Shabbat. Okay, you can eat it after Shabbat. Now, what they don't talk about here, but it is talked about in Masechet Shabbat, is this concept of bichdei sheyasu. You can't eat it the second Shabbat's over. You can eat it, okay, I'm thinking like a recipe. There's always prep time. Whatever the prep time is, how long it takes to make, that's the amount of time that you have after Shabbat that you can eat it. So if it takes an hour to make, then you can eat it an hour after Shabbat. The idea being that you can't benefit from work that was done on Shabbat by someone, or, malacha, translating as work, by one of the malachot done by someone on Shabbat, but you can benefit from it in the sense that, well, all they did was they sped up the process for you. So if you could have done it yourself, then fine. So basically, since it would have taken you an hour, so you can eat it an hour after Shabbat. Okay, that's Rabbi Meir's position. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, b'shogeg yochal l'motzei Shabbat, b'mezid lo yochal olamit. Rabbi Yehuda says, the position of Rabbi Meir in mezid is the same as Rabbi Yehuda in shogeg. Rabbi Yehuda says, if it was done accidentally, you can eat it on Motzei Shabbat. You can't eat it on Shabbat, but you can eat it Motzei Shabbat. If someone did intentional malacha on Shabbat, you can never eat that food. That is food that you just can't eat, okay? This is, by the way, the issue of a place that's not Shomer Shabbat, a restaurant, right? If they don't keep Shabbat, you can never benefit from the food that was made on Shabbat, right? That's the problem. Rabbi Yochanan Asan Romeo, he's the first one who starts distinguishing between, the only one, distinguishes between who can eat it. He says, if you did it b'shogeg, ye'achel lemotzei Shabbat, la'achirim velo lo. He agrees with Rabbi Yehuda, you have to wait till Motzei Shabbat, but he says, but only for other people. The person who did the malacha themselves can never benefit from this, even though you did it unwittingly. And he goes all the more so, he says, b'mezid lo yachel olamit, lo velo la'achirim. This, by the way, is the same as Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, it can never be eaten. Here he just says, not even to others. Okay, no one can benefit if it was done intentionally. So now, the first thing to note is that all three of them have the same position of you can't eat it today, you can eat it b'motzei Shabbat, just in different situations and in different details. So let me just point out, and I underline this in the chart, that these three opinions, and that's why the Gemara is going to ask, okay, why we didn't say like this, okay? But just, if you didn't get that, I'll explain in a minute. There's a case according to everybody where the food can't be eaten on Shabbat, it can be eaten on Motzei Shabbat, okay, after Shabbat. For Rabbi Meir, it's mezid. If you did it intentionally, then you can only eat it Motzei Shabbat. For Rabbi Yehuda, it's if it's unintentional. And for Rabbi Yochanan Sandlar, it's the same, it's unintentional, but only for other people, the person who did themselves is not allowed to eat. So now, let's go back to our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said, again, let's just review. If you slaughtered on Shabbat, okay, and Yom Kippur, you can eat the shechita, but Rav said only after Shabbat. And the rabbi said he's holding by Rabbi Yehuda. So that is this opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Now that would mean, and we're going to talk about this, that the Mishnah is talking about a case of shogeg. Because if it was mazid, intentional, what does Rabbi Yehuda say? It can never be eaten. And that's not what the Mishnah says. The Mishnah says the shechita is valid. So what we're basically doing is we're filling in the blank and we're saying when the rabbi said the position of Rabbi Meir, it's this position right here that I bolded. Someone who cooks on Shabbat, bishogeg, unwittingly, will be able to eat the food only, will be able to eat the food, but only on Motzei Shabbat, and that's the position of Rabbi Yehuda. Same thing for shochet. Ha-shochet b'Shabbat b'shogeg, yachel Motzei Shabbat. Okay, so here come our slew of questions. Number one, v'nukma b'mezid, v'Rabbi Meir. Okay, first question, why don't we just say it's Rabbi Meir and it's Mazid, right? Okay, sorry, I bolded the wrong one. It's Rabbi Meir in a case of intentional. Okay, and then we'll read the Mishnah like this. Hashochet b'Shabbat intentionally, or on Yom Kippurim, even though you're mitchayev b'nafsho, your shechita is kshera. That actually makes perfect sense, right? You can eat it, and then came Rav and said, only after Shabbat's over. So why didn't we say that? That's question number one. So the Gemara answers, lo salkadatach. It's not the most convincing answer, but we'll read it, we'll explain it. He said, lo salkadatach, dekatani dumia di Yom Kippurim, because our Mishnah compared Shabbat and Yom Kippur. Now, obviously, there's a big difference in Yom Kippur. You can never eat it on Yom Kippur because you can't eat on Yom Kippur. So, my Yom Kippurim, lo shna b'shogeg, lo shna b'mezid, lo achil. Now, in Yom Kippur, it doesn't matter whether you did shogeg, whether you did mezid, no matter what, if you slaughter an animal on Yom Kippur, you can never eat it on Yom Kippur because you can't eat on Yom Kippur. So, Avachanami, we want to find here a case where Nami lo shna b'shogeg v'lo shna b'mezid lo achil. Now, we want to find a position that Rav is going to hold by that doesn't distinguish between, right, no matter what, whether you're shogeg or mezid, it can't be eaten on that day. Now, let's look at Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says if it was shogeg, you can eat it on that day. Rabbi Yehuda says, if it was shogeg, you can't eat it that day. And if it was mezid, you can't eat it that day. In fact, you can't eat it ever. But because Shabbat is next to Yom Kippur here, we want to find a case where they're going to assume that Rav is holding by someone who doesn't think it could be eaten ever on Shabbat. Not if it was shogeg, not if it was mezid, and that's Rabbi Yehuda, not Rabbi Meir. Okay? That's question number one. Now, question number two. Mi matzib mukmen le b'shogeg v'Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, wait a minute. We're explaining our Mishnah that's a case of shogeg, right? That's the only way we get to you can eat the meat. Otherwise, if it was mezid, you wouldn't be able to eat the meat at all, ever. So that doesn't make sense because the Mishnah says, I'm going to just keep reading this Mishnah again. Each time we have to focus on a different word. Even though you get karet for doing it intentionally, your shechita is kshera. That sounds like the subject of the Mishnah is intentional, not shogeg. So we're going to answer that. Hachi kamar. Read it like this. Af al pi de b'mizid mitchayev b'nafshohu, hacha de b'shogeg shchitato kshera. Okay, how are we going to read this? Even though it's so severe that if you did it intentionally, you would get karet. If you did it b'shogeg, we'll still let you eat it. Okay? In other words, the mitchayev b'nafsho is just talking about the severity. It's not talking about the actual case. Okay. Third question. Just like we asked, why didn't we say, okay, and this is why I underlined all three of them. We have three people, and I mentioned this already. Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yochanan Sandler each have a case where you can't eat it today, but you can eat it after Shabbat's over. So we just explained why we can't say Rabbi Meir, and that's because of the Yom Kippur thing. And we want a case where he's going to think, we're assuming Rav holds by an opinion that doesn't ever allow it to be non-Shabbat, just like you can never eat it on Yom Kippur. Now we're going to move to Rabbi Yochanan Sandler and say, why didn't we hold by his position? He also says like Rabbi Yehuda, which is if it's shogeg, you can eat it only on Motzei Shabbat, and if it's mazid, you can't eat it at all. So why don't we say like Rabbi Yochanan Sandler? Amar lo shna b'shogeg, lo shna b'mazid, lo achil, right? He has both shogeg, both mazid. It can't be eaten on Shabbat. That would fit the first problem. So what's the answer? Obvious answer is, remember, how does Rabbi Yochanan Sandler differ from Rabbi Yehuda? He distinguishes between the person who shechted it and everyone else. The person who shechts it can never eat it. So Rabbi Yochanan Sandler kamaflig b'motzei Shabbat. He distinguishes on Motzei Shabbat la'achirim v'lo lo. Other people can eat it, but the person who slaughtered it himself can't. Tana didan shchitato kshera katani lo shna la'achirim. Our Mishnah basically says it doesn't matter if it's right. Our Mishnah says very simply, hashochet b'Shabbat shchitato kshera. It doesn't say only for everyone else, not for the shochet. So that's why it doesn't match Rabbi Yochanan Sandler's position. And with that, we answered all three questions we had on how do we connect this. Why specifically did the Chevraya say, the rabbis say, that Rav's position is based on Rabbi Yehuda? And that we resolved. Okay, now we're going to start a different sugya, which is really connected. Actually starts off with the Mivashel b'Shabbat. We're going to have a scene that happened. What we really are getting at here is there was a scene that happened in the Beit Midrash, and we want to figure it out in light of our sugya. Okay, or it's going to connect eventually to our sugya. It's going to start connecting with the Mivashel b'Shabbat issue, okay? But later we'll get to the Shochet issue in our Mishnah. Tana kamei de Rav. Okay, the first thing you have to understand is what were things that transpired in the Beit Midrash and who were the characters. So there's Rav. He's an Emora. He's the teacher. We all know Rav, right? One of the most famous Emorim there are, first generation. He has people in his Beit Midrash that bring brightot. We see this all the time. Right? People, remember, they memorized brightot. There were people with excellent memories, and they would come to the Beit Midrash and they would bring brightot. So here comes the rabbis were known to do the analysis and know the traditions, but they didn't always know all the brightot. So there were people who were in charge of memorizing brightot, and they would bring the brightot in front of the rabbi. That's this Tana kamei de Rav. It literally translates as a Tana brought a bright in front of Rav. Now, a Tana is usually someone from the Tanaitic time period. That's not what this is. The word Tana can also mean someone who brings brightot, okay? That's this person who lives in the time of the Amoraim, but they call him a Tana. So it's not the same Tana as someone who lived then, but someone who quotes the brightot. Okay. That's just side, not so important. So he's in the Beit Midrash, he brings this brightot before Rav, and he says the following. Mivashel b'Shabbat, b'shogeg yochal, b'mezid lo yochal. Okay, let's look back at our chart. That is the exact words of Rabbi Meir, right? B'shogeg yochal, b'mezid lo yochal. Okay, sounds like he's simply bringing Rabbi Meir's position. But what happened when he brought this brightot in front of Rav? Mishatek le Rav. Rav shut him up and said, don't say that in my Beit Midrash. Okay, very strange. My time of Mashatik le Rav, Mishatik le. Why did he silence him? Doesn't make any sense. And if we, especially, right, it sounds like he's bringing Rabbi Meir's position. Now, Ilema, there's a great line, okay, and it teaches us a lot about how bad our current culture is, okay? So, you'll see why in a minute. Ilema mishum desfira le ke Rabbi Yehuda, vitane tane ke Rabbi Meir. Maybe he shut him up because, very simply, okay, there's a chart. The second chart on the page is basically giving the first answer to understanding. We're going to reject it on 2 counts, and then the second answer. Okay, so the first answer is maybe because Rav held like Rabbi Yehuda, okay, which is, eat it. You can eat it only on Motzei Shabbat if it was shogeg. And mezid, you can never eat it. And the Tana brought the position of Rabbi Meir. You can eat it on Shabbat if it's shogeg, and you can eat it on Motzei Shabbat if it was mezid. And, right, and because of that, because he held like Rabbi Yehuda, he silenced because he was bringing Rabbi Meir's position. But the Gemara says there's no way you could say that. Number one, Mantani Mishum Tisvir like Rabbi Yehuda, Mantani Rabbi Meir, Mishatikle. Okay, wait a minute. We're going to say because he held like Rabbi Yehuda and he didn't agree with Rabbi Meir, so anyone who brings Rabbi Meir's position is going to silence him? That's absurd. You might disagree with someone, but you're not going to, and this is why I said it's about our culture, right? Where people can't manage to disagree with each other, right? They hate each other. They won't listen to the other position. You can't shut someone up just because you disagree with their position. In other words, the Tana had a reasonable position here. He was holding by Rabbi Meir, right? That's not any Joe Schmo, right? He had a valid opinion. You don't silence someone just because they brought a dissenting opinion. Ve'od, second issue. Mi savar laki Rabbi Yehuda. Wait a minute. Rav actually doesn't hold like Rabbi Yehuda on this mevashel machloket. How do we know? V'ha'amar Rav Chanan bar Ami ki morele. Okay, so Rav Chanan bar Ami says two things. Okay, when he says about Rav, when he would paskin ki morele Rav lehu Rav letalmidei, when he would teach his talmidim, mori lehu ke Rabbi Meir. On this position of mevashel b'Shabbat, he would actually hold like Rabbi Meir. But ki darish bepirka darish ke Rabbi Yehuda mishuma me'aretz. Only when he got up, there's another interesting thing. When he got up, and when I say interesting, I mean this has broader ramifications than just our sugya, right? So the first thing was, just because you disagree with someone doesn't mean you shut them up. The second thing is, when you teach in the big shiur to everybody, you often are more stringent because people are going to take it, right? If you teach like Rabbi Meir, that if you did it by accident, you could still eat the food on Shabbat. What do you think the Amei Haaretz are going to do? They'll say, you know what? Let's cook on Shabbat. We'll claim it's shogeg. We'll eat it, right? They're going to misconstrue your words and better to be more strict. But he really held like Rabbi Meir. So it doesn't make sense that he would quiet someone in the Beit Midrash and say, don't say that just because it's Rabbi Meir's position. And as let's assume he would shut someone up who had a dissenting opinion, okay? But he even held by that opinion. So it really doesn't make sense that he shut him up for that reason. And even if you want to say v'chitema, now we just said, but what do you mean? When he was darshaning to everybody, he would be like Rabbi Yehuda. So maybe Tana b'pirkei Tana kameh. Maybe the Tana came before him while he was in the big shiur, and everybody heard, and he wanted to shut him up so that the Amei Haaretz didn't think that we hold like Rabbi Meir. But atu kule ama letana tzaite le'amora tzaite. And here again, we go zoom out into like the big picture here. How did it work in the Beit Midrash? When they were in the Beit Midrash, there were the people, like I said, who brought these brightot. And then there was the Amora. Now, the Amora isn't really Rav. Okay, Rav is an Amora, but the Amora was what we call the translator, the microphone. He would basically take the rabbi's words, or I was thinking this morning, you call it like a TA, okay, teacher's assistant. They basically explained, sometimes the rabbis weren't so easy to understand, either their voice couldn't carry as much, or they didn't explain. Sometimes you have people who are great Talmidei Chachamim, but they don't explain it well enough to the average person. So the Amora's job was to make the rabbi's words clear to the people, okay, whether in tone, whether in sound, in loud, decibel level, whether in whatever it might be, but he's the one who the people listen to. They don't listen to the Tana, they listen to the rabbis. So he didn't need to shut up the person for that reason. Okay, so this doesn't make any sense to us as of yet. We tried to think that maybe the Rav holds like Rabbi Yehuda and the Tana held like Rabbi Meir, and that's why he shut him up. That we've completely rejected. Comes Rav Nachum bar Yitzchak. I'm Rav Nachum bar Yitzchak, and he explains. Tana shochet Tana kamei de Rav. You misunderstood the case. We said before that the Tana who brought the Braita, putting back up the study guide, the Tana who brought the Braita said him v'ashel b'Shabbat b'shogeg yochal b'mezid lo yochal. Right, that was the Braita he brought before him. Now we're going to say no. You're confused. It wasn't that. It was our Mishnah. Hashochet b'Shabbat. Okay, or not our Mishnah. The topic of our Mishnah. Okay, it was a Braita about Hashochet b'Shabbat. It wasn't mivashel b'Shabbat. And what did the Tana say? Okay, the same words now. B'shogeg yochal, mezi lo yochal. Okay, it's just switching ha-mevashel to ha-shochet. Now, that should also, though, I mean, wouldn't you assume Rav says the same thing about mevashel and ha-shochet, right? Rabbi Meir, I mean. So they're going to say like this. What was the problem that Rav had with him? Amar le, my da'atech ki Rabbi Meir, what you hold like Rabbi Meir? Ad kan lo kashari Rabbi Meir ele b'mevashel. Dira oy lachos. Aval shochet de'en ra'oy lachos lo. Now we go back to the topics we talked about yesterday, about muktzah and things being ready before Shabbat. Hashochet is very different from hamavashel. One who cooks on Shabbat takes food that usually could have been eaten before being cooked. And what'd you do with it? You cooked it. Now it's ready for eating cooked. Okay? Now, that means it wasn't muktzah. Now, what does muktzah mean? Muktzah means something that's set aside that you're not going to use on Shabbat, right? So we talked about, let's say you can't use a pen on Shabbat, so your pen is going to be muktzah, or you can't use your television on Shabbat, your television is muktzah, your telephone, okay, whatever it might be. That is muktzah because you're not going to use that on Shabbat. It's called set aside for not for use, okay? Your animal is set aside before Shabbat to not be used because you know that you can't slaughter it, so you're not going to eat it on Shabbat. So that's the problem. Hashochet b'Shabbat b'shogeg yochal, you can't eat it if it was done b'shogeg, you slaughter b'shogeg, okay, assuming we're talking about eating it raw. You can't eat it raw because it was muktzah. It was set aside before Shabbat for not to be used on Shabbat. Whereas cooking, yes, Rabbi Meir says cooking on b'shogeg yochal because it was already ready to be eaten yesterday. It's just not in that form. So he says, if you're going to apply what Rabbi Meir says in Hashochet, and you're going to apply it, and what he says in Mevashel, to shochet, to slaughtering, it's not a relevant comparison. Okay, that's the explanation. So now the Gemara is going to have a question on that. Now we're on the second side, right? The second side of this chart is we're going to reject this, okay? But if you see here, we're going to reject it, we're going to reject the rejection, then we're going to ask a difficulty on that, and then we're going to answer it. So we're going to end up with an answer here. And then in the end, we're going to keep this second answer. But we're going to, not without raising a difficulty first. V'hamatnitin deshochetu. Wait, our Mishnah, though, is about a shochet. Okay, now we're going to do the connection of this sugya to our sugya. Our Mishnah was about a shochet. And what did Rav Huna say? Rav Huna, now we go back to the beginning that we keep reviewing. Rav Huna said, Darish Chia Barav, Mishmei Derav, Asura Bachila Liyoma, V'nas ben Chavraya Lamema, Rabbi Yehudahi. Right, remember the friend said, this is Rabbi Yehuda's position. But now, wait a minute. From there, what can you assume? Only Rabbi Yehuda forbids it that day. Ha Rabbi Meir Share. It seems very clear from the fact that he held like Rabbi Yehuda and said, don't eat this today. Sounds like Rabbi Meir, who's lenient in Mevashel, would be lenient in Hashochet as well. And that disagrees with what we just said. Because Rav told the student, again, we don't know what Rav told the student. Rav just told the student, be quiet, don't say that. And the assumption is that Rav told the student to be quiet because Rabbi Meir wouldn't permit it on Shabbat. And it sounds like from our Mishnah and what Rav said and what the teachers, that the Chavraya said about Rav, is that Rav, who said you can't eat on Shabbat, was only Rabbi Yehuda's position, Rabbi Meir would permit it. So we're now going to say, now remember, why is Rabbi Meir going to forbid it? Because besides the issue was cooked on Shabbat, which that we could deal with, it was done b'shogeg, you can eat it, we have no problem. But it's got a muktzah problem. So if we can neutralize the muktzah problem, then we can explain it. So now we're going to neutralize the muktzah problem. Kishari Rabbi Meir. Now our Mishnah assumes that Rabbi Meir will allow this to be eaten on Shabbat. In other words, again, the Gemara on our Mishnah assumes that because it says Rav, who said you can't eat it today, was only Rabbi Yehuda. Kishari Rabbi Meir kegon shayalo cholet mi ba'od yom. Okay, turning now to Amud Bet. When Rabbi Meir permitted it, he permitted it in a case where the meat wasn't muktzah, the animal wasn't muktzah. Why was the animal not muktzah? Because if you had someone sick in your house that was dying, okay, or not dying, but in danger of dying, okay, they were very sick, that you can, what we say, pikuach nefesh doche Shabbat. So you knew before Shabbat came in that you might need to slaughter an animal for this person if they need meat to eat right then, and that will save their life. So before Shabbat, you didn't say, oh, I'm not going to slaughter my animals. You thought, it might happen that I'll have to slaughter on Shabbat. And therefore, they're not muktzah. So if we can neutralize the muktzah problem and basically say that the reason he held like Rabbi Yehuda was because according to Rabbi Meir, if there was someone sick in the house, it actually wouldn't be a problem. You would be able to eat the food on Shabbat, then that all fits in. One little question on this and difficulty and then answer. Wait a minute. If you have a sick person in your house and you need to slaughter the animal for the sick person, the assumption is you had a sick person going into Shabbat, so you intended to maybe have to slaughter the animal, and therefore it wasn't muktzah. Well, then when you slaughter the animal, well, that should be totally fine according to everyone because you did it for pikuach nefesh, to save this person. So they say, no. No, the issue of the sick person was only at stage 1. Before Shabbat, you had a sick person in your house that maybe you would need to slaughter meat for. But then what happened? What happened was the person got better. Or you don't even have to say that. You just have to say the person who slaughtered the meat wasn't doing it for the sick person. It wasn't because the sick person needed the meat. Okay? So in the end, the malacha was done as a malacha. It wasn't some heter that you had to do it because the person was sick. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the sick person allowed us to get over the muktzah problem, but when the slaughtering actually happened, it was done incorrectly. Okay? And we've resolved that. Okay, so that's our second answer. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak brought this. And again, it's all a theory, okay? It's this theory that we're assuming that what happened here was the student made this connection, brought a braita that was within Rabbi Meir's position for Mevashel, applied it to Shochet, and probably there was a braita that said that, and Rav said it's a mistake, okay? Whoever made that comparison was incorrect because the shchita, Rabbi Meir would never permit it on Shabbat, even b'shogeg, because or specifically in shogeg, because it's muktzah, okay? Now, this was a theory that the Gemara came up with to explain the answer, that Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak came up with. But now we're going to prove it. That Rav actually said somewhere else where he himself distinguishes between Mevashel and Shochet in this issue. And that is going to just support this second answer. Okay, somebody quoted in the name of Rav. Hashochet lechole b'Shabbat asur lebari. Hamevashel b'Shabbat lechole b'Shabbat mutar lebari. Okay, now he's not talking about the same case. He's talking about someone who actually slaughters an animal or cooks food for a sick person who needs the food, right? So if you're shochet for a sick person on Shabbat, a healthy person is not allowed to eat it. But if you cook for a sick person on Shabbat, the healthy person can eat it. Now, why is this? My taima, hai ra'oi lachus v'hai eno ra'oi lachus. What's the reason? Because the food was already ready from before Shabbat. It wasn't muktzah. It wasn't set aside for non-use. It was food. You could have eaten it. Now you cooked it. Now you can eat it cooked. But the animal was set aside before Shabbat to never be eaten. So because of that, it's not a possibility, okay? Because it's got a muktzah problem. And that's why even though it was cooked, it was slaughtered for this sick person. However, we're not going to let anyone else benefit because for everyone else, it was basically set aside before Shabbat for not to be used. Okay, so there you see that exact distinction that what you would say for Mevashel is not the same as Hashochet. I'm a Rav Papa, but Rav Papa points out, and this is all charted out in the chart at the bottom of the page, פעמים שהשוחט מותר, כגון שהיה לו חולה מבעוד יום. מבשל אסור, כגון שקצץ לו דלת. Rav Papa brings 2 exceptions to the rule, and he's going to say, it's not always the case that hashochet is muktzah and mevashel is not muktzah. Sometimes you can have the opposite, that a case of mevashel could be muktzah and a case of hashochet could be not muktzah. And then the case of hashochet, if you did it for some sick person, everyone else would be allowed to eat it. What would be the case? If you had a cholemi ba'od yom, like we talked about before. If there was someone sick in your house before Shabbat and you knew that maybe you'd end up having to slaughter it, and then you do slaughter it, guess what? Everyone else can benefit from it because you slaughtered it not for them, and you slaughtered it beheter, it was permitted, so other people can eat it. We're going to talk about this and add one point to this in one more minute. And the mevashel could be forbidden in a case where you cut gourds. Okay, what's the issue with gourds? Machloket Rashi and Tosfot. Either the gourds were attached to the ground before Shabbat, which means that since you have to cut them, which you can't do on Shabbat, it was set aside for not being able to use because they were attached to the ground. And then you cut them because you're allowed to cut them for the sick person, but the healthy person can't eat them. Or it's because dalad is inedible. Dalad raw is very hard and doesn't taste like anything. So it's inedible, and because it's inedible, so by cooking it, obviously you turn something inedible to edible, and that's why it would actually be muktzah, and you wouldn't be allowed to eat that. Okay, now Amar Rav Dimi min Hardea. He comes and gives a halacha. Here's the psak, bottom line. Okay, we don't always get the bottom line. Today we get a bottom line here. Hilchata. Hashochet lechole b'Shabbat, mutar lebari be'umtza. If you slaughter an animal for a sick person b'Shabbat, now you have to say, in a case where the sick person was already known from before Shabbat and the animal wasn't muktzah, it's permitted for a healthy person to eat it raw. Okay, so you can't eat it cooked because you can't benefit from the cooking, which we're going to see in a minute, but you can eat it raw. My taima. Now we're going to add an issue that we didn't talk about before. Now when you shecht an animal, let's say the person needs only a kezayit to eat, okay? But you can't shecht an animal partially just to get one kezayit of meat. That would be called ever min achai. Basically, you would take it from a live animal. When you do the act of slaughtering, you have to slaughter the animal completely in order to permit one kezayit of meat to be eaten, right? In order to not permit, but to get a kezayit of meat. So the rest of the animal is slaughtered and available now for anybody because you didn't do the action with intent for anyone else, right? The only way to do it for the sick person is to completely slaughter the animal. But that's different from cooking because in Mevashel b'Shabbat, asur lebari lechole b'Shabbat. If you cook for someone who's sick, let's say you put up a chicken soup, right? The best medicine. So, right, you put up a chicken soup for someone on Shabbat. Asur lebari. No one else can eat it. Why? Because the rabbis forbade it because they said, just like on Yantif there's this issue, we're worried you're going to add more food for other people. And it's once you know, oh, you know what, I'm cooking a soup, I'll make a big soup, and then the rest of us can eat it. You're not allowed to do that. So since your shlita has no effects on anyone else, you can't slaughter it only part way for the sick person and then not continue it because all we need is a little bit of meat. There is no such thing. But cooking, you could just cook a very small chicken soup. I mean, maybe some of us don't really know how to do that, but you could theoretically cook a small chicken soup, and therefore you can't add any more. And therefore, even if you cooked a big chicken soup, we're not going to allow anyone else to eat it because we're worried. The rabbi said, if we allow it, then next time you'll add more for other people, and therefore that's forbidden. Okay, so there we get to the psak. Okay, moving on to the next Mishnah. We're now talking about what are you allowed to slaughter with. You slaughter with a magal yad, a hand sickle, bitzur with a flint. Okay, if you want to learn about flints, flashback this week is all about flints. Our Chullin Mishkan's article in ancient times and how they use flints. It's a good article. Ubekaneh with a reed. Shchitato kshera. Okay, these are all sharp items. Now the magal yad we're going to learn is sharp on one side and it has a jagged edge on the other. You obviously can't use a jagged edge. That's the whole problem. A jagged edge can't be used because you might cause to tear something in the animal before you actually do the slaughtering, which will then, or tear the simanim even before you get to start slaughtering, and then, or before you finish the slaughtering, and that's going to create a treifa situation. So we don't want that. But you can use a magal yad, bitzur ubekaneh with a flint or a reed, which is also, those are sharp implements. Shchitato kshera. If you did it, your shchita is good. This is going to create a big problem because what does it imply here? Only b'di'evet. Okay, you don't know why that's a problem, but we're going to see it's a problem. Okay, this means only post facto. You shouldn't do this ideally, but post facto it works. Hakol shochatin u'lo'olam shochatin u'bakol shochatin. Okay, everyone can slaughter. You can always slaughter, and with everything you can slaughter. Chutz mimagal katzil. Okay, the sickle, that these are things you cannot use. Okay, what it means, I'll just stop for a second. Everyone can, and for any time you can. We don't know what this means yet. We're going to wait till the Gemara comes to explain it. But bakol shochatin, you can use all kinds of implements other than a magal katsir, okay, a specific sickle they used for harvesting, a migera, shinayim, tziporin, these are all different implements. that have teeth on them, okay? Or they're sharp. The tziporin is actually the nail of the animal while it's attached to the body of the animal. That's a different thing, okay? Because these things are chonkim. Now, chonkim usually means choking. What they really mean here is it creates a tear in the animal before you slaughter it, okay? Or it could. Okay, so now what we really want to focus on right now is the first part of the Mishnah. This tzur and kaneh specifically. Hashochet diavad in, lechatchila lo. If you shochet, right, it says hashochet, the one who slaughters, we're going to accept their shchita. If they use a tzur or a kaneh, we're going to ignore the magal yad right now, okay, because you'll see why in a minute. Bishlama magal yad dilma atelemea babidach gisa. Okay, the magal yad is very obvious why lechatchila you shouldn't do it, ideally. Why not? Because it's got the two sides, and if we allow you to use one side, you might accidentally use the other side. But our problem is going to be with the tzur and the kaneh, because it seems to say in this Mishnah about tzur v'kaneh lechatchila lo. Right? Why does it say you can't do it ab initio? Why can't I just take a flint, take a reed that's sharp, and slaughter with it? What's the problem? And not only do they think we can't think of the problem, but that's not what's bothering them. What's bothering them is an explicit braita. Uriminhi. It says in a braita, bakol shochatin. Okay, it's actually also, it seems like it's also a tosefta. Bakol shochatin, bein bitzor, bein b'schuchit, bein b'krumit shel kaneh. You can slaughter with anything, including, right, whether it's a tzur or flint, whether it's a piece of glass, or whether it is the krumit of the kaneh. I forgot what the word krumit is, if someone can remind me. I'm just blanking on the translation right now. But it's the stem of the reed. Yeah, I saw some other better word. Anyway, it's fine. We'll call it the stem of the reed, okay? Which is sharp. So here it says, bakol shochatim. You can use it, okay? So if you can use it, then what's the problem? Right? Why does our Mishnah say only if you used it, we'll accept your shchita? So this just seems to say ab initio. Lo kashya, kam b'talush, kam b'mechubal. Okay, we're going to say, if it's attached to the ground, better not to use it. Okay, first of all, things attached to the ground you can't control as well, right? And it might cause a problem. Attached to the ground, detached from the ground. That's going to be our distinction. So our Mishnah is talking about attached to the ground. The Braita is talking about detached from the ground. Okay, so if it's detached, you can use it ab initio. It's sharp, it doesn't have jagged edge, we're good. If it's attached, we're going to limit you. Okay, better not to use it, but if you did, it's fine. Da'amar Rav Kahana. Now here comes Rav Kahana, and he tells us there's a machloket about this, and now we're going to have to see whose opinion does this match. Hashochet b'mechubar lakarka, Rebbe posel, ve'Rebbe Chia machshil. Okay, so Rav Kahana brings this braita that says, if you shochet b'mechubar lakarka, you use something attached to the ground. Rebbe says no good at all. Rabbi Chia says it's permitted, he allows it. Now, Rav Kahana says, ad kan lo machshir Rabbi Chia ela b'diavad, aval lechatchila lo. And then you'd have to say that Rabbi Chia only permits it b'diavad, and that perfectly matches our Mishnah. So our Mishnah is b'mechubar, attached to the ground, and according to the opinion of Rabbi Chia. Okay, try to keep this all straight in your head because we're going to see that we're going to complicate matters. So again, just to get where we're up to, we had a contradiction, Mishnah Braita. To resolve it, we said Mishnah is mechubar, Braita is talush, detached, and the Mishnah that's mechubar is only according to the opinion of Rabbi Chia, okay, who says it's permitted, and when he says it's permitted, we're going to assume he means only b'diavad, post facto. And then we have someone to match. Okay, now they say, wait, this isn't going to work either. B'mayu kimta, ki Rabbi Chia u'diavad. Wait, so you're saying our Mishnah is Rabbi Chia and only post facto? Elaha d'Tanya, but there's another braita, which is the Tosefta, which completely contradicts that because, or doesn't allow us to say that, because if we say that Rebbe forbids completely, Rabbi Chia permits only post facto, then this Tosefta is going to make no sense. Listen to the Tosefta. Add a third source. Bakol shochatin, bein b'talush, bein b'mechubal. Okay, you can use anything to slaughter with, whether it's talush, whether it's mechubar. This sounds like ab initio. And what's going to be the problem? This matches neither position. Okay, so we're going to keep going in the Tosefta though, but that's all we needed in the Tosefta. Ben shasakin lemala, v'tzavar be'ma lamata. You can slaughter whether the knife is on top and the animal's below, or ben shasakin lemata, v'tzavar be'ma lamala. You can do it where the animal's above you and the sakin is underneath. talk about this more later, not today. Mane, okay, so who is this according to? Lo Rebbe velo Rabbi Chia, because they're going to spell it out, but it's obvious, because Rabbi Chia, the evident lechatchila lo. We just said Rabbi Chia doesn't allow it ab initio. And Rebbe, Nami lo, he doesn't even allow it post facto. So this Tosefta, which says, right, we basically assume there's obviously two opinions. There's no more than the two opinions. So if we assume, now we didn't know what Rabbi Chia said. All Rabbi Chia said was machshir. And we came and said he must be machshir b'diavad, and that matches our Mishnah. But then that means the Tosefta makes no sense because it doesn't match anyone. So to respond, they say, fine, la'olam Rabbi Chia afilu lechatchila. Let's go back to Rabbi Chia in the Brighton. Rabbi Chia says he's machshir, and we assumed it was post facto, and they said it was post facto. What they're trying to say is, actually, Rabbi Chia permits it even ab initio. From the beginning, you can use it, ideally. Now, the fact that they said the machlokets in a b'diavad case was only lahodiacha kochodil Rebbe. It was just to say that Rebbe is stringent even post facto. That's why that second bright, we have three bright, right? Three Tanaitic sources. One was our Mishnah, one was that bright, right? Now we're just explaining the bright. The bright we said was about a b'diavad situation. That was just to tell you that the rabbis hold that even in a b'diavad situation we won't allow it. But Rabbi Chia will permit it even ab initio. And that resolves the contradiction between Breita 2 and Tosefta, the third one. Because the third one says it's permitted ideally, from the beginning you can do it. And that's going to be Rabbi Chia. But that doesn't make sense now with our Mishnah, because what did we say about our Mishnah? Our Mishnah is clearly b'diavad, and we said our Mishnah matches Rabbi Chia. If we say that Rabbi Chia says even lechatchila, then our Mishnah matches nobody, and we're back to square one. Although you'll see we won't actually go back to square one. Here comes the problem. Our Mishnah, which it says hashochet, the evident lechatchila lo, it says one who slaughters the shchita is kshera. That's only a language of b'diavad, post facto. Mane lo Rebbe velo Rabbi Chia. If we say that Rabbi Chia allows it ideally, and Rebbe doesn't allow it even post facto, then this Mishnah makes no sense according to anybody. If it's Rabbi Chia, then you can do it even ab initio, and Rebbe diavad nami lo. And if it's Rebbe even post facto, you can't do it. So what do they answer? Lo olam, a very strange answer. Lo olam Rabbi Chia afilu lechatchila. We're not going to change what we said about that. Rabbi Chia really permits it lechatchila. Again, that was resolving the second two sources with each other. The one says you could do it ab initio. The other says only post facto, but we said no, post facto was just for Rebbe. Really, Rabbi Chia permits it ab initio. Now, manitin tekatane hashochet Rebbe. So in the Mishnah, we can't square our Mishnah away with Rabbi Chia like we thought. Our Mishnah is b'mechubar, it's attached, and it's Rebbe's position, who allows it post facto. What? We said Rebbe's posel even post facto. That doesn't make any sense. Kasha de Rebbe ad Rebbe. So lo kasha. And here we're going to get to our final conclusion for today. We're now going to make a third distinction. For now, we came up with two distinctions. Talush, mechubar. Talush, we can do it ab initio, right? Talush, right. We can use it ab initio. Mechubar, we're going to allow it, right, only post facto. That's our Mishnah. So now, our Mishnah that's mechubar, though, we're going to say the following. Kam b'mechubar mi'ikaro. Now we're within Rebbe, okay? Now, Rebbe didn't allow, if it was mechubar, he doesn't allow mechubar at all. But that's only when it's mechubar mi'ikaro. That's something that grew from the ground and stayed attached to the ground. But in our Mishnah, where Rebbe's going to allow it post facto, is kam b'talilushu lebasof chibro. It's a case where it was detached from the ground, and they later attached it to the ground. That's not as attached as something that was originally attached and stayed attached. So we're going to talk about two levels of mechubar. Now, the obvious question the Gemara is going to ask is, okay, so now let's just get it straight. Our Mishnah, which says post facto, you can use something that's attached to the ground, the tzur, right, the tzur and the kaneh that are attached to the ground, is a tzur and a kaneh that was detached originally, or maybe became detached at some point, and then was put back into the ground. And that Rebbe is going to be more lenient with. Okay? Now, again, Rabbi Chia would permit this all lechatchila, because even mechubar he permits lechatchila, according to the conclusion of the Gemara. But Rebbe is going to allow this only post facto, and that's our Mishnah. So now the Gemara has to say, where do we get that there's this distinction? They're going to show it in this bright. Ditanya, hashuchet b'muchni, if you use a mechanism, okay, muchni, mechanism, it's the same root, which is like a pulley, okay? And your knife is on a pulley and you're slaughtering the animal using the pulley, okay? So you're controlling it with the muchni. Shchitato kshera. It works, it's effective. Okay, that's not relevant right now. B'mechubar lakarka, shchitato kshera. Okay, you got that? If it's attached to the ground, your shchita is good. If you stick a knife in the wall and you use it for slaughtering while it's attached to the wall, it's fine. It's also mechubar. Note that case, by the way, it was separated and then got attached. Okay, but that's okay. If you have a flint that's stuck in a wall, okay, attached to a wall, or a reed that grew on its own, shachatbo, and you use it for slaughtering, shchitato psula, it's disqualified. Now we have an issue. What's the issue? Kashina hadade. There's a contradiction within this braita. It says mechubar lakarka, your shchita is okay. Then it talks about two cases of mechubar lakarka, and the shchita is disqualified. So, the only way to resolve the contradiction within this braita, forget about contradiction between two braitas, is to say there must be a distinction between something that's attached, that was detached and later became attached, to something that was attached from the beginning and remained attached all the time. And that proves the answer that we had to resolving that contradiction. So, quick summary of today. We got our fifth answer to which position of Rabbi Yehuda. It's Rabbi Yehuda in the Mevashel Sugya. We then had three questions on that. Why not Rabbi Meir? Why not like Rabbi Yochanan HaSandlar? And why not, right? How could you say the Mishnah's shogeg? Because you had to say that if it was Rabbi Yehuda, if the Mishnah actually says mitchayev b'nafsho. But we resolved all those difficulties. Then we moved on to this story that happened in the Beit Midrash where someone brought a braita about the Mevashel, and Rebbe shut him up, and we didn't understand why. And then we said it must be that he brought, right, the Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, no. He brought it about the shochet, and they tried to make the comparison from Mevashel to shochet, and that was incorrect. And that was all according to Rabbi Meir, and that we distinguished between the muktzah and the not muktzah, right? Which one's muktzah, which one's not. And then we had all sorts of ins and outs about that, where there would be exceptions to the rule and how we paskin on those issues. Then we got to what you can use for slaughtering. We had our Mishnah, which contradicted a Braita, which when we resolved the contradiction, Talush Mechubar, we brought a third source, a Tosefta, which contradicted our answer. And then we had to distinguish three distinctions. There was Mechubar, Talush, and this middle position, which is the position of our Mishnah, which is something that was originally detached and then became attached. And that's not going to have the same laws as something that's actually attached from the beginning. And with that, we finish for today, wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom and a Chag Sameach for Yom Yerushalayim.